Before we begin, take a second to imagine this. A prison so secure that no one has ever escaped. A place where silence is louder than screams, where daylight is measured in inches, and where some of the most dangerous men in America slowly lose their sense of time, and sometimes their sanity. This isn't a movie. It's real. And for the last 3 decades, it has stood quietly in the heart of Colorado, guarding secrets the public was never meant to see. In this video, we're peeling back the steel doors of ADX Florence, the only federal Supermax prison in the United States, often called the Alcatraz of the Rockies. You're going to see how it was built, why it exists, and how it reshaped the entire American prison system. But beyond the walls and barbed wire, this story is about something deeper: power, fear, and what happens when control becomes absolute. Every fact you'll hear in this story comes from real events, documented cases, first-hand accounts, and reports from inside America's most secretive prison. So pay close attention, because what you're about to learn reveals not just how far the justice system will go to keep order, but also what it costs in human lives and minds. Now let's begin. The scream came first, sharp, metallic, swallowed quickly by the thick concrete of the corridor. It echoed through a place that was never meant to echo. A guard froze mid-step, his flashlight trembling slightly in his hand. Somewhere deep inside ADX Florence, the man in cell 317 was losing his mind again. The buzzing lights flickered as if the building itself was alive, breathing in the madness it had created. Moments like this weren't rare, they were routine. But few people outside those walls understand why this place exists, or what history gave birth to it. To know that, we have to travel back to a time when America's prison system was on the brink of chaos. It was 1983, inside USP Marion, a federal prison in Illinois. The atmosphere was pure tension, gang wars, power struggles, guards walking on edge every day. Then, on 2 separate occasions, violence exploded. 2 correctional officers, Merle Klutz and Robert Hoffman, were brutally murdered by members of the Aryan Brotherhood, a white supremacist prison gang. They were stabbed repeatedly with handmade weapons, attacks so sudden and cold that they shocked the entire Bureau of Prisons. When the reports reached Washington, one man understood what these murders meant: Norman Carlson, the director of the Bureau of Prisons. Carlson had spent years studying the rise of gang violence inside federal prisons, and he realized something no one wanted to admit: the system was losing control. He decided that the only way to regain it was to change everything about how high-risk inmates were handled. So, in a move that would forever alter American incarceration, Carlson ordered USP Marion into a permanent state of lockdown. No open movement, no communal meals, no free recreation. Every inmate would be locked in his cell for 23 hours a day, with 1 hour for isolated exercise in a small cage under open sky. It was a radical experiment in total control. The policy worked, at least on paper. The violence stopped. But inside those walls, a new kind of suffering began. Prisoners started showing signs of mental breakdowns. Some spoke to the walls. Some screamed into the void. The silence became a weapon. Psychologists later described the environment as a laboratory for psychological decay. Yet Carlson saw it differently. In his eyes, this was progress, order restored through isolation. And so, the control unit model became the foundation for a new type of facility. A prison built entirely around the idea of absolute containment. A place that could hold the most violent, most notorious offenders in total solitude, cutting them off from the world forever. By the early 1990s, that idea began to take shape in Colorado. Construction started on a barren stretch of land near the small town of Florence. The facility would cost $60 million, a massive investment, but one the government justified as necessary to protect the public and even other inmates. To the outside world, it was called the United States Penitentiary Administrative Maximum Facility, ADX Florence. To those who understood what it meant, it was the final stop, the end of the line. When it opened in November 1994, few people noticed. There were no headlines, no ribbon-cutting ceremonies, just the quiet transfer of inmates under heavy guard. The design of the prison was unlike anything ever built before. The cells were 7 feet by 12 feet, barely enough space to stretch your arms. The bed was made of poured concrete, the desk bolted to the wall, the window a narrow slit position so the prisoner could see only a patch of sky, never the horizon. Every detail had a purpose: to prevent escape, to minimize contact, to erase the concept of freedom. Meals were pushed through a slot in the steel door. Inmates could not see or touch one another. Even when they exercised, it was alone, in a small concrete pit surrounded by walls taller than a man's reach. The average prisoner would spend 23 hours a day in that room, 7 days a week, for years. From the outside, it looked like the perfect solution. Crime bosses could no longer run gangs from behind bars. Terrorists couldn't plan attacks. Serial killers couldn't inspire copycats. The government had built the most secure prison in the world, a place where escape was impossible. But beneath the surface, the cost was staggering. Over the years, former guards, psychologists, and even inmates themselves would come forward to describe what really happened inside those walls. The psychological toll of isolation, the suicides, the silent breakdowns that never made headlines. 30 years later, ADX Florence still stands, its lights glowing faintly in the Colorado night, surrounded by mountains that stretch endlessly around it. For some, it's a necessary fortress. For others, it's a symbol of everything wrong with America's obsession with control and punishment. But one truth remains: the story of ADX Florence didn't start with the prison itself. It began with fear, power, and a single question that still haunts the system today: how far should a nation go to control its own monsters? Fact 2. The solitary reality inside ADX Florence. If you ever wondered what life looks like inside America's most secretive prison, picture this. A man sitting alone in a small, concrete room, barely 7 feet wide and 12 feet long. No sound. No light except a thin blade of sunlight sneaking through a 4-inch window slit. Every sound he makes bounces off the cold walls and dies in silence. This is ADX Florence, the place many call the clean version of hell. This isn't just another maximum security prison. It's a world built on isolation. A fortress where human contact is a privilege few ever experience. Every inch of the prison is designed to control, confine, and contain the most dangerous individuals in the United States. And even among the men who live here, there's a hierarchy. 5 population levels that determine just how much freedom an inmate can feel or how much silence he must endure. The general population units are where prisoners with the lowest security risk are kept. But low risk in ADX still means high control anywhere else. They're allowed a small taste of the outside world, about 2 hours of recreation time each day, inside a cage the size of a parking space. They might meet a psychologist once a week or attend tightly monitored group therapy sessions. But even then, every move is under the watchful eyes of the Bureau of Prisons. The remaining 22 hours? Locked in a soundproof cell, a concrete box with a poured cement bed, bolted down desk and stool, and a toilet sink combo built into the wall. Everything is immovable. Everything is designed to prevent harm or escape. There's no pillow, no mattress comfort, no privacy, not even a whisper that isn't overheard or recorded. Each cell has a 4-inch slit window carved at an upward angle. Prisoners can see only the sky, not the ground, not the mountains that surround the facility, not even other inmates. The architecture itself is psychological warfare, ensuring that a man never feels free, not even in his mind. Then comes the control unit, a deeper level of isolation, where inmates are sent after violating rules at other federal facilities. This is where ADX becomes a behavioral machine. A single act of good behavior could move an inmate back toward the general population, but one mistake, one argument, one broken rule, and you start again from the bottom. Guards in this unit rarely speak. Their communication is mechanical, their expressions masked behind professionalism and routine. Every cell door can be operated remotely, and every meal is passed through a slot. No physical contact. Inmates here often begin to lose track of time, sometimes even their own identity. Psychologists call it segregation syndrome, a condition where isolation slowly rewires the human brain. But that's only the beginning. Deeper inside the compound lies HUnit, a place so secretive that even most correctional officers never step foot inside. It's for inmates under special administrative measures, known as SAMs, the most extreme control system within the Bureau of Prisons. Prisoners placed here are considered capable of causing harm even from inside a cell. They could be mob bosses, terrorists, or criminal masterminds, men whose words alone can cause chaos in the outside world. Under SAMs, every call, every letter, every word spoken is monitored, censored, or denied. Some inmates are forbidden to talk to anyone besides their lawyer, and even those conversations happen under strict surveillance. As of June 2024, there are around 40 inmates in ADX under these measures. For these men, silence becomes punishment and eventually identity. Some inmates have reportedly spent years without speaking to another human being face to face. Imagine that. No conversation, no physical touch, no shared laughter or argument. Just the sound of your own breathing and the faint hum of a fluorescent light overhead. But even this isn't the final level. The deepest, darkest layer of ADX is known as Range 13. It's a 4-cell corridor, hidden and sealed from nearly everything else. Here, even meals are delivered without a word, trays slid through slots by unseen hands. The doors are controlled remotely, the walls are soundproofed, and even the air feels thick with silence. Some reports say the lights can be dimmed or shut off completely. Every detail is meant to break the rhythm of time, to make days and nights blend into one endless loop. According to official records, only a few men have ever been placed in Range 13, names that haunt headlines and courtrooms alike. Joaquin El Chapo Guzman, the notorious Mexican drug lord. Ramzi Youssef, the mastermind behind the 1993 World Trade Center bombing. And Thomas Silverstein, the most feared prisoner in American history, who once lived decades in isolation after killing a guard at another facility. Each of them spent time here, surrounded by silence so deep it could drive a man insane. The Bureau of Prisons rarely speaks about Range 13. When reporters ask for details, they decline to comment. Even former guards describe it as the place where time stops. No one knows how long some inmates stay there. Some say weeks, others whisper years. Yet, for the men who built ADX, every inch of it had a purpose. Norman Carlson, the architect of the Supermax idea, believed that absolute control was the only way to prevent chaos. To him, isolation was protection for the guards, the system, and even for the inmates themselves. But over the decades, human rights groups have called ADX a place that erases humanity, a facility that replaces rehabilitation with silence and despair. As ADX Florence approaches its 30th year in operation, its legacy is both controversial and fascinating. It stands as a monument to the American belief in control, discipline, and justice, yet also as a haunting reminder of what happens when punishment turns into permanence. And as the sun sets over the Colorado Rockies, a faint orange glow slips through the narrow window of an inmate's cell. For a few fleeting moments, he sees the sky, feels warmth, and remembers what life felt like before the walls closed in. Fact 3. No one has ever escaped ADX Florence, the clean version of hell. They say the only way out of ADX Florence is in a coffin. That's not an exaggeration. It's a warning whispered among America's most dangerous men. From the outside, ADX looks like a brutalist monument to control, a fortress of concrete buried deep in the barren Colorado desert, where the wind hums against razor wire and the air itself feels like it's watching. For 30 years, the United States' highest security prison has stood unbroken, undefeated, and unescaped. Not once, not even close. Every brick, every steel bar, and every camera lens inside ADX Florence was engineered for one purpose: to make the idea of escape impossible. The facility sits miles from the nearest town, surrounded by 12-foot fences coiled with razor wires so sharp it could slice through bone. Beyond that, a second layer of fencing hums with motion sensors. The ground itself is wired, pressure pads, laser grids, and heat detectors that can pick up the faintest movement of a stray animal. Above it all, watchtowers rise like concrete sentinels, manned by sharpshooters who never let their eyes drift from the perimeter. But what truly traps a man inside isn't the steel or the guns. It's the architecture of isolation. The building is silent, sterile, and deliberately confusing. Its labyrinth of corridors, 1,400 electronically controlled steel doors, and endless surveillance points create an environment where every step, every breath, is tracked. Inside the control center, A small team of officers can see and operate everything, from doors and cameras to lights and alarms. It's a digital panopticon, a place where the system itself becomes the warden. Even the air feels heavy. The soundproof walls swallow noise, so silence reigns over every cell block. You can scream at the top of your lungs in ADX, and no one, not even the guard 2 doors away, will hear you. The only sound that truly carries is the echo of steel doors slamming shut. That sound means control. That sound means you're still trapped. Robert Hood, one of ADX's former wardens, once told CNN, "It's a clean version of hell." He wasn't speaking in metaphors. He'd seen men arrive full of swagger and rage, only to watch the light drain from their eyes as they realized the truth. There is no freedom here, not even in imagination. Hood described how, upon entry, inmates catch one final glimpse of the Rocky Mountains, a breathtaking view that will haunt them forever. When you get inside, he said, that's the last time you'll ever see it. That's not just poetic. It's the reality of a place where windows are mere 4-inch slits angled at the sky. No horizon, no sunrise, no world beyond concrete. Just light and shadow, morning and night. ADX doesn't just contain the body, it consumes the mind. For the men who live inside, every movement is a negotiation with routine. Doors slide open only when ordered. Meals arrive through mechanical slots. Recreation happens in small, enclosed yards that resemble empty concrete boxes, so isolated that even birds avoid them. When inmates stretch their arms toward the sky, it's the closest they'll come to freedom. And if a man dreams of breaking free, he has to reckon with the math. First, he'd have to escape his cell, a room built from reinforced concrete with an electronically sealed steel door. Then, he'd need to breach multiple layers of security, the pod's inner gates, the surveillance sensors, and the outer fences, all while invisible eyes watch from dozens of cameras. There's no blind spot, no weak point, no flaw to exploit. Even the ventilation shafts are too small for a human body. Over the years, rumors have circulated, tales of inmates plotting, digging, scheming. But the truth? Not one of those attempts ever made it past a single gate. Every whisper of rebellion is met with precision. Lights flood the corridor, alarms scream, and armed response teams arrive within seconds. By the time the would-be escapee realizes it, they're already back in restraints, sometimes bruised, sometimes bloodied, but always defeated. It's this perfection of control that gives ADX its dark legend. To the Bureau of Prisons, it's a necessary evil. A place for men too dangerous, too violent, too uncontrollable for anywhere else. But to many former guards, psychologists, and human rights advocates, it's something worse. It's a machine designed to erase humanity. That duality, safety versus suffering, is what makes ADX so controversial. Some say it keeps America safe from its monsters. Others say it turns men into ghosts. Either way, the result is the same. 30 years, 0 escapes, and thousands of broken minds. Even among guards, few forget the chill of that silence. When I walked those halls, one former officer confessed, it felt like being inside a tomb where the bodies were still breathing. For the men serving life sentences, time isn't measured in years, but in the rhythm of locked doors and the heartbeat of isolation. Every tick of the clock is a reminder, this is it. This is forever. The prison's designers succeeded beyond imagination. They built something that's more than a building. It's a symbol of absolute control, a warning carved in concrete. ADX Florence isn't just escape-proof in the physical sense. It's psychologically airtight. Every inch, every soundproof wall, every remote-controlled lock was built to ensure that hope itself couldn't find a way out. And so, the record stands untouched. 3 decades. No escapes. Not one. When the sun sets behind the Rockies, the prison fades into shadow, indistinguishable from the mountain stone around it. But inside, under cold fluorescent lights, the inmates of ADX Florence are wide awake, each one haunted by a single, terrible truth. In this place, there's no running. There's no breaking free. Because in ADX Florence, escape doesn't exist. Fact 4. The 2005 murder inside ADX Florence. Blood in the world's most secure prison. For a place built to crush chaos, ADX Florence still bleeds. It was supposed to be impossible. The clean version of hell, designed to silence violence forever, suddenly echoed with the unthinkable, the thud of fists, the dull crack of bone, and the desperate rattle of alarms. In 2005, deep inside the world's most secure prison, an inmate named Manuel Tati Torres was murdered by two men who were supposed to be just as trapped as he was. Torres wasn't a small name in the underworld. Before those walls claimed him, he was a leader of La Im, the Mexican mafia, one of America's most powerful and feared prison gangs. He'd been serving time for crimes that stretched across states, a man used to ruling others from behind bars. But in ADX Florence, power shifts in silence. Respect is just another illusion, and paranoia is the only real currency. On that cold morning, Torres was in the recreation yard, a small, caged concrete pen under a pale Colorado sky. Each inmate gets a few hours of freedom per day, isolated in what's essentially an outdoor cell. The air was still. The yard echoed with the distant hum of steel doors and faint footsteps from unseen guards. Then came the moment that shattered ADX's illusion of total control. Silvestre Chicali, Mayorki Rivera, and Richard Chuco Santiago, both known members of La Im, were assigned to the same rec area. The Bureau of Prisons believed the trio could share space without issue. After all, these men were used to hierarchy, bound by the same criminal code. But that code was about to crack. As Torres stretched near the wall, Rivera moved in fast. The sound of flesh hitting concrete broke the silence. Santiago joined him. Within seconds, the two men had overpowered Torres, raining blows with lethal precision. There were no makeshift weapons, just fists, elbows, knees, and years of pent-up rage. The guards watching on the cameras saw it too late. By the time the alarm blared through the corridor, Torres's body lay twisted, lifeless, his blood seeping into the cracks of the cold rec yard floor. Even in a place where every inch is monitored, the murder happened fast, brutally fast. The cameras recorded it all, but technology couldn't stop it. The supposed fortress, built with lasers and sensors and 1,400 steel doors, had just witnessed its own failure. When Rivera was pulled away, his hands were trembling, not from fear, but from something colder. He later told investigators that Torres had planned to kill him first. He struck preemptively, he said, to survive. Whether that was truth or paranoia, no one knows. In ADX, survival and fear often look the same. What makes the killing even more haunting is the sheer futility of it all. Rivera only had about 15 years left to serve, a number that could have meant seeing the outside world again. But that one moment of fury erased it all. He was sentenced to life in prison for the murder, sealing his fate forever behind concrete. His accomplice, Santiago, was already serving a life term. He narrowly escaped the death penalty and received another life sentence stacked on top of his first. Neither man will ever leave ADX. The murder of Manuel Torres forced the Bureau of Prisons to confront a terrifying question. If violence could erupt there, could anywhere truly be safe? The entire idea behind ADX was absolute control, a place where even the most dangerous criminals could never harm another soul again. But that day in 2005 proved that human rage doesn't follow blueprints or security systems. Inside ADX Florence, hatred can live for decades, festering quietly, hidden beneath silence and routine. And when it finally explodes, no amount of technology can stop it. After the incident, the prison went into lockdown. Investigators scoured every inch of the rec area. Blood samples, footprints, camera angles, all meticulously recorded. Guards were interrogated, and security protocols were rewritten. For months, the prison lived in a state of unease. Every clang of a door, every shift of shadow, felt like a reminder that even in the most secure place on earth, men still find ways to kill. To the outside world, the story barely made a ripple. The Bureau of Prisons released a short, cold statement confirming the incident and moved on. But inside those walls, everyone remembered. For the inmates, it became a ghost story, a whispered warning about trust, betrayal, and the thin line between control and chaos. Years later, Rivera and Santiago remain locked inside the same institution that witnessed their crime. Their names are etched into ADX's dark mythology, alongside the Unabomber, the Shoe Bomber, and El Chapo. But their story stands out, not because of who they killed, but where they did it. They committed murder in a place that was designed to make murder impossible. Former Warden Robert Hood once said ADX is life after death. That phrase feels heavier after 2005. Because for Manuel Torres, it was literal. And for Rivera and Santiago, it became their eternal punishment. In the years since, the Bureau has tightened restrictions further, introducing more layers of isolation, more barriers, more silence. But every guard, every inmate who's walked those halls since knows the truth. ADX Florence might be escape-proof, but it's not emotion-proof. As long as men breathe inside those walls, there will always be a spark waiting to ignite. Today, when the cold Colorado wind sweeps across the rec yard, it passes over a spot where blood once stained the concrete. The cameras still watch, the doors still hum shut, and the system still pretends it's unbreakable. But those who know the story remember that one day, even the most controlled place on Earth lost control for exactly 47 seconds, and it cost a man his life. That's why this fact matters. It reminds viewers that no matter how advanced, no prison can erase what makes us human: fear, anger, survival. ADX Florence isn't just about walls and wires. It's about what happens when men with nothing left to lose are forced to live inside their own silence. Fact 5. The 9/11 co-conspirators who'd rather stay in Guantánamo than face ADX Florence. For most people, Guantánamo Bay is a nightmare, the symbol of endless detention, torture allegations, and human rights scandals. But for the men accused of plotting the September 11th attacks, it's the lesser of two hells. The thought of being transferred from Gitmo to ADX Florence, the Alcatraz of the Rockies, isn't a relief. It's a sentence worse than death. Guantánamo Bay sits on a remote edge of Cuba, surrounded by blue waters that seem almost mocking in their calm. For more than 2 decades, it's been home to men caught in the shadow of America's longest war, a place where time stands still and trials drag on endlessly. Yet, within its barbed wire fences, the prisoners can still pray together. They can share meals. They can talk. They can see faces other than their own reflection in stainless steel. ADX Florence offers none of that. It's a place designed to erase noise, contact, and hope. Even among the world's most hardened criminals, ADX is whispered about like a curse. It's where terrorists, mob bosses, serial killers, and traitors go to disappear from the world. Each inmate is sealed into a 7 by 12-foot concrete cell, soundproof, lightproof, and emotionless. There, they spend 22 to 23 hours a day alone, staring at a slit of a window angled toward the sky so they can never see the horizon. Zacharias Moussaoui knows this firsthand. The only person ever convicted in connection to the 9/11 attacks, he spends his life sentence inside ADX Florence's walls. Once, he stood in a federal courtroom in Virginia, defiant and unrepentant. Now his voice is swallowed by silence. His world is concrete, his prayers are private, and his conversations are with memory alone. For the 5 other men accused of helping orchestrate 9/11, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, Walid bin Attash, Mustafa al-Hassawi, Ammar al-Baluchi, and Ramzi bin al-Shib, the future once pointed to the same destination, Florence, Colorado. But they fought to avoid it at all costs. In 2016, defense attorney Bernard Kleinman, who had represented clients at both Guantánamo and ADX, told NBC News that imprisonment in Florence would be a much greater punishment than life in Gitmo. That statement wasn't hyperbole. It came from first-hand experience. At Guantánamo, detainees can pray communally and see one another in the yard. In Florence, those same actions would be impossible. Even prayers would echo back unheard. The irony is brutal. Men who were once accused of crimes that shook the entire world now beg to remain in a prison synonymous with torture. But that's what ADX represents. It's not just punishment, it's erasure. Their legal limbo has stretched for years. The trials of Mohammed and his co-defendants have been repeatedly delayed by plea negotiations, the COVID-19 pandemic, and the mental breakdown of one accused, Ramzi bin al-Shib, who was deemed unfit to stand trial. The New York Times reported that one of the sticking points in plea deal talks wasn't about sentences or guilt, it was about prayer. The men wanted guarantees that, even after conviction, they'd be able to eat and pray together. That simple request tells you everything about what ADX truly is, a place where human connection ceases to exist. For them, Guantánamo is hell, but a hell that still allows them to feel human. ADX is something colder. There, they become phantoms locked in soundproof tombs, each man invisible to the other. Inside Guantánamo, the detainees have sunlight. They can walk under open skies. They can share a word, a look, a ritual. In Florence, the recreation yard is a solitary concrete cage, barely larger than a parking space. When the sky appears above, it's through a metal grate, like looking at freedom through a screen. One of the prison's former wardens, Robert Hood, once described ADX as life after death. For men already condemned by the world, that description carries a special weight. It's not death they fear, it's nothingness. And that's exactly what ADX promises. If the 9/11 conspirators ever make it to Florence, they'd be joining a grim roster. The Unabomber, the Boston Marathon bomber, shoe bomber Richard Reed, and drug lord El Chapo. Each one has learned what happens when human beings are sealed in silence long enough. They start to disappear piece by piece, until all that's left is the sound of their own heartbeat. To most Americans, that sounds like justice. But to the few who've seen ADX up close, it's something darker, an experiment in isolation that blurs the line between safety and cruelty. Even the guards admit it. Once you enter, you change. The stillness seeps into your bones. The air tastes of metal. Time stretches into infinity. There's no shouting, no movement, no chaos. Just the hum of fluorescent lights and the soft click of locks. That's why the men at Guantánamo fight to stay. Not because they expect freedom, but because they fear disappearing entirely. At least in Cuba, they still exist as a group. At ADX, they become ghosts the moment the steel doors shut. The Bureau of Prisons doesn't advertise this reality. Officially, Florence is where America keeps its worst threats, where order is absolute. But behind that order lies something even more unsettling. A place so sterile, so perfect in its control, that it destroys the very thing it was built to contain, the human mind. When historians look back at this era, they'll remember Guantánamo for its scandals, its interrogations, its moral questions. But they'll remember ADX Florence for something else entirely, as the endpoint. The place where even monsters beg not to go. So when you hear that the 9/11 co-conspirators would rather remain in Guantánamo Bay than be transferred to Florence, it isn't sympathy, it's testimony. It proves how deep the fear of ADX runs. In a world full of prisons, it stands alone, untouched, unbroken, undefeated, and utterly terrifying. Fact 6. The lawsuit that exposed the darkest side of ADX Florence. If you think ADX Florence only holds America's most dangerous criminals, terrorists, traitors, and serial killers, think again. What if I told you that some of the men trapped inside the Alcatraz of the Rockies weren't dangerous, but deeply broken? This is the story of how ADX became the center of a shocking lawsuit, one that forced the U.S. government to face the truth about what really happens inside its most secretive prison. In 2012, a group of 11 inmates did the unthinkable. From behind layers of concrete and steel, they fought back, not with violence, but with a lawsuit. Their case was called Cunningham versus Federal Bureau of Prisons, and it became the first ever successful class action suit against the Bureau of Prisons in American history. These weren't ordinary inmates. They were men suffering from severe mental illnesses, psychosis, schizophrenia, depression so deep it drove them to harm themselves just to feel something. They were trapped in a place built to silence monsters, not to heal the sick. Ed Arrow, one of the lead attorneys from Arnold and Porter, still remembers his first visit inside ADX. He said it became obvious after just a few meetings that this wasn't a case of a few guys who fell through the cracks. ADX, he realized, had become a dumping ground for really, really sick people. The stories that came out during the lawsuit were horrifying. Inmates screaming through the night, banging their heads against steel doors until blood stained the floor. Men cutting themselves with razors, shards of glass, even sharpened chicken bones. Others swallowing nail clippers, broken glass, and metal pieces from radios. Anything they could find to escape the torment of isolation. There were prisoners talking to voices only they could hear, trapped in delusions that blurred the line between madness and reality. Some smeared feces on the walls, creating unbearable health hazards. Others threw waste at guards out of rage, confusion, or sheer desperation. Suicide attempts weren't rare, they were routine, and many of them succeeded. For years, the Bureau of Prisons ignored these cries for help. Official policy forbade placing mentally ill inmates in solitary confinement. But at ADX, those rules didn't seem to exist. Men who needed treatment were thrown into silence. And when they broke, it wasn't seen as suffering. It was seen as disobedience. The lawsuit exposed all of this to the world. For the first time, the perfect image of ADX Florence began to crack. Behind its spotless reputation for security was a hidden nightmare, a place where neglect was disguised as order. And for once, the system had to answer. In 2016, the case was finally settled. The Bureau of Prisons agreed to make sweeping reforms. Better mental health screening before inmates could be sent to ADX. Enhanced psychological care, including group therapy, one-on-one counseling, and real suicide prevention measures. And most importantly, the transfer of severely mentally ill prisoners to new step-down facilities designed for treatment, not punishment. It was a historic moment. The first time America admitted, through legal action, that its toughest prison had gone too far. But even with those reforms, the scars of what happened inside ADX remain. The sound of endless screaming, the smell of despair, the silence that follows when someone stops answering through the vent. All of it lingers in the memories of those who've been there. The lawsuit may have changed policies, but it didn't change the past. When people talk about ADX Florence, they often speak of security, control, and justice. But Cunningham v. BOP forced everyone to confront another reality. That justice without humanity is just another form of cruelty. And that's what makes this fact so important. It reminds us that even in the name of safety, a line can be crossed. ADX Florence didn't just cage America's worst criminals. It also caged men who needed help. For years, their pain was hidden behind thick concrete walls. Until, finally, the world listened. Fact 7. The tragic silence. 9 suicides inside America's most secure prison. They say no one can escape ADX Florence. But some inmates found a way out, through death. For 30 years, the Alcatraz of the Rockies has stood as an impenetrable fortress, designed to control every move, every breath, every second of its inmates' lives. But what happens when that control turns into despair? What happens when the most secure prison in America can't even protect its prisoners from themselves? This is the haunting story of the 9 men who took their own lives inside ADX Florence. Between 1999 and 2017, 9 inmates, each trapped within the same concrete walls, made the ultimate decision to end their suffering. Their names are etched into the dark legacy of the Supermax. Kevin Lee Wilson, 1999. Gregory Britt, 1999. Lawrence Clacker, 2002. Lance Vanderstappen, 2006. John Frierson, 2008. Jose Martin Vega, 2010. Robert Gerald Knott, 2013. Boyd Wallace Higginbotham, 2015. Jamie Jarrold McMahon, 2017. ***. 9 lives. 9 stories that ended in silence. And each one of them happened in a prison that's supposed to be impossible to penetrate, escape, or break. Yet somehow, these men broke from the inside. ADX Florence was engineered to eliminate risk. Every cell is 7 by 12 feet, soundproof, concrete, sealed tight. The walls are thick enough to muffle screams. The bed is a solid concrete slab. The desk, the stool, the toilet, all bolted in place, impossible to move or dismantle. Every moment of an inmate's day is watched by cameras and motion sensors. Every sound, every shadow recorded. But even in this total surveillance, even in this place built to stop violence before it happens, 9 suicides slipped through the cracks. How? In February 2024, the Department of Justice released a fiery audit that may hold the answer. Investigators dug into more than 340 inmate deaths across federal prisons, uncovering a disturbing pattern of policy violations, operational failures, and chronic neglect. The audit revealed that the Bureau of Prisons, already struggling with massive staffing shortages, simply couldn't meet the needs of the people in its custody. There weren't enough mental health professionals. There wasn't enough oversight. And there wasn't enough humanity. The report didn't mention ADX Florence by name, but the findings echoed loudly within its concrete halls. It pointed out inappropriate mental health classifications, a lack of proper care, and environments that made despair inescapable. One statistic stood out. Nearly half of all federal prison suicides happened in single-cell confinement, the same kind of isolation that defines life inside ADX. To understand why that matters, you have to picture life inside one of those cells. You wake up to the hum of fluorescent lights, a world of gray concrete and silence. You spend 22 or more hours a day alone. No human contact, no sound except your own thoughts bouncing off the walls. The only window in your cell is a 4-inch slit angled toward the sky, so you can't even see the horizon. The food is delivered through a slot in the door. The guards speak to you from behind glass. And if you scream, no one hears you. Now imagine living like that for years. Days blur into weeks, weeks into months, until time itself becomes another kind of prison. For some men, that silence became unbearable. Kevin Wilson and Gregory Britt were the first to take their lives, both in 1999, the early years of ADX, when the facility's procedures were still new and untested. Others followed, spaced out across the decades. Each suicide should have triggered reforms, but instead, the pattern repeated. Inmates like Jose Martin Vega, who reportedly struggled with deep mental illness, or Boyd Wallace Higginbotham, whose life ended just days before a scheduled court hearing. Then, in 2017, Jamie Gerald McMahon became the 9th recorded suicide, his death marking nearly 2 decades of tragedy inside a prison supposedly built to prevent it. What makes these deaths even more haunting is that, by design, suicide at ADX should be impossible. Every item inside a cell is weapon-proof. Every inmate is checked constantly. And yet, again and again, it happened. The DOJ report suggested that this wasn't just a failure of design, it was a failure of the system itself. The Bureau of Prisons was stretched too thin, undertrained, and unprepared to handle the psychological toll of isolation. In other words, the very environment meant to control violence was creating another kind of destruction, slow, invisible, and internal. For many Americans, the name ADX Florence brings to mind terrorists, traitors, and mass murderers. It's a place built to contain evil, to keep the world safe from its worst people. But this fact, 9 suicides in 30 years, forces us to confront something uncomfortable. When punishment turns into psychological decay, when silence becomes torture, can we still call it justice? Or has the line between safety and cruelty been quietly erased behind those walls? Each of those 9 men lived and died in near-total isolation. No cameras captured their final moments. No guards heard their last words. Their deaths didn't make headlines. They were just added to a file, logged as incidents, then forgotten. But inside that silence lies a message louder than any siren. Even in the most secure prison in America, humanity still finds a way to crumble. When people call ADX a clean version of hell, they're not exaggerating. It's quiet, spotless, efficient, and utterly soul-crushing. And for at least 9 men, that was enough to make death seem like freedom. Fact 8. The con man in the cage. When ADX Florence isn't about violence. When people hear the words ADX Florence, they imagine monsters. The terrorists. The mass killers. The men whose names send chills down spines across the United States and beyond. It's a place built for the worst of the worst. But inside those same concrete walls, you'll find a different kind of criminal. Someone whose weapon wasn't a gun or a bomb, but a phone call. And his name is Jimmy Sabatino. At first glance, Jimmy didn't fit the image of an ADX inmate. No tattoos across his face. No history of violence. No ties to extremist groups. He was a con man, a master manipulator who could convince anyone to believe anything. By the time he was sentenced in 2017, Sabatino had already spent decades hustling his way through the American justice system. From hotels in Miami to corporate phone lines, he left behind a trail of deception that even the FBI found impressive. And yet, prison wasn't the end for him. It became his new playground. While serving a 20-year sentence for financial crimes, Sabatino did the unthinkable. He kept running scams from behind bars. Using contraband phones and stolen identities, he orchestrated one of the most audacious frauds ever committed from inside a U.S. prison. His biggest target? Nextel, the major communications company. He conned them out of roughly $3 million in phones, plans, and service fees, all while wearing prison beige. How did he do it? With words. The same charm that once got him into VIP rooms and record deals now let him pose as executives, manipulate call centers, and pull corporate strings, all through a payphone's hum and stolen access codes. For Sabatino, prison walls were just another set of challenges to outsmart. But eventually, the game ended. The Bureau of Prisons had seen enough. They transferred him to ADX Florence, the most isolated and secure facility in the nation, the same place holding terrorists, mob bosses, and murderers. To stop him from manipulating anyone else, the government placed him under Special Administrative Measures, SAMs, a legal status so strict that even some of the world's deadliest inmates don't face such tight restrictions. Under SAMs, Sabatino can't speak to other prisoners. He can't use the mail freely. He can't even have unmonitored conversations with his own lawyer. Every word he writes, every phone call he makes, every whisper that leaves his cell, monitored, logged, and approved by the FBI. His only permitted contacts are his attorney and his elderly stepmother, and even they get only 2 15-minute calls per month. 15 minutes. That's half the length of a single sitcom episode. The government's reasoning? Sabatino's crimes weren't fueled by rage or ideology. They were fueled by communication. And at ADX, silence is the most powerful punishment of all. A 2024 Westward article called him America's loneliest prisoner. It wasn't an exaggeration. In the HUnit, where Sam's inmates are kept, there's no talking, no communal meals, no shared yard time. Just a concrete room, 7 feet wide, 12 feet long, and a single window slit pointing at the Colorado sky. His only companion is his own mind. Imagine a man who lived for manipulation, now stripped of every opportunity to use it. For Sabatino, whose entire identity was built on conversation and control, silence is worse than any physical restraint. But Sabatino isn't the only nonviolent inmate locked inside ADX. He's just one example of how the Supermax doesn't only hold murderers, it also holds men the system can't control any other way. There's Richard Lee McNair, known as one of America's most successful escape artists. McNair slipped out of handcuffs, jail cells, and even a North Dakota prison by hiding in a mailbag, literally mailing himself to freedom. When he was finally recaptured in 2007 after years on the run, authorities decided there was only one place secure enough for him, ADX Florence. Then there was Robert P. Hansen, a former FBI agent turned Soviet spy. Hansen's betrayal was one of the worst intelligence breaches in U.S. history, exposing American double agents and handing over national secrets for more than 2 decades. He wasn't violent, but the damage he caused changed Cold War history. He died from cancer in ADX in 2023, alone, like so many before him. What unites these men isn't bloodshed, it's obsession. Sabatino couldn't stop scheming. McNair couldn't stop escaping. Hansen couldn't stop betraying. Each one of them had a mind that refused to quit, and the U.S. government's solution was the same: isolation. But this raises an uncomfortable question, one that even American audiences watching from the comfort of their homes have to consider. If ADX is supposed to protect society from violent threats, why are men like Jimmy Sabatino, nonviolent, mentally sharp, but endlessly manipulative, trapped in the same cages as terrorists and mass killers? To the Bureau of Prisons, the answer is simple. ADX isn't just about punishment. It's about control. When you can't stop someone with bars, you stop them with silence. You strip away their audience, their voice, their stage. You force them to face themselves, alone. And maybe that's the real power of ADX Florence. It doesn't just confine the body, it dismantles identity. For a man like Jimmy Sabatino, that's worse than any sentence a judge could hand down. The public rarely thinks about inmates like him when they hear Supermax. They think of El Chapo, the Boston Marathon bomber, or Ramzi Youssef. But the truth is more complicated. ADX Florence is where America sends not just its most violent, but its most uncontrollable. Some try to escape through violence, others through silence. But either way, in the heart of Colorado, under the watchful eye of the Rocky Mountains, every man eventually learns the same lesson. Inside ADX, the real battle isn't against guards or walls, it's against yourself. Fact 9. Even ADX Florence isn't immune to America's prison staffing crisis. When most people think of ADX Florence, the so-called Alcatraz of the Rockies, they imagine an impenetrable fortress where nothing can go wrong. It's America's only federal Supermax prison, purpose-built to hold the most dangerous men alive. With reinforced concrete walls, motion sensors, remote-controlled doors, and round-the-clock surveillance, it seems almost infallible. But behind that image of perfection lies a problem no amount of concrete can fix: a massive staffing crisis. Over the past decade, the Federal Bureau of Prisons, BOP, has been quietly collapsing under the weight of a nationwide labor shortage. The problem isn't confined to small or underfunded facilities. It's reached the highest levels of federal incarceration, including ADX Florence itself. Despite being the most secure prison in the United States, ADX has found itself short of one critical resource: the people who keep it running. According to BOP data, the federal prison workforce has dropped by nearly 20% in the last 8 years, leaving gaps that affect every corner of the system. In theory, ADX should be immune to such problems. In practice, it's not. The Supermax requires a delicate balance of precision, manpower, and coordination to maintain its strict isolation regime. When staffing falters, that balance collapses. At a 2024 Senate Judiciary Committee hearing, BOP Director Colette S. Peters didn't sugarcoat the situation. She testified that the Bureau is still faced with an inability to compete with the private sector and other law enforcement agencies. Translation: it's hard to convince people to work in one of the toughest environments in America for less pay, longer hours, and fewer benefits than they'd earn elsewhere. It's not hard to see why recruitment has slowed. Working at ADX Florence isn't just another correctional job. It's one of the most psychologically demanding posts in the entire federal system. Officers monitor inmates like Ted Kaczynski, Ramzi Youssef, and Jakar Tsarnaev, men capable of violence and manipulation on an extraordinary scale. Every move, meal, and interaction is carefully scripted. Officers escort inmates in handcuffs and leg irons, even for short distances. A single lapse in attention can have deadly consequences. But with fewer officers to share the burden, mandatory overtime has become the new normal. Many staff now work double shifts, sometimes 60 to 80 hours a week, just to cover essential posts. Burnout is rampant. And when staff are stretched this thin, safety deteriorates, not just for officers, but for inmates too. The Federal Correctional Complex, FCC, Florence, which houses ADX along with 3 lower security facilities, has been hit especially hard. In 2024, Representative Brittany Pedersen, who represents Colorado's 7th Congressional District, revealed that the complex was short nearly 200 correctional officers. That's a staggering figure for a system that relies on precision scheduling and strict manpower ratios. The employees at the Federal Correctional Complex in Florence have been overworked and faced severe understaffing issues for years, Pedersen said in a press release. A prison that is fully staffed is a safe one. Otherwise, these conditions lead to forced overtime and dangerous situations for both workers and prisoners. Her warning highlights a critical truth. Even in a place as controlled as ADX, the greatest risk isn't an inmate escape, it's human exhaustion. How staffing shortages affect ADX operations. To understand the crisis, you have to understand how ADX works. Each inmate lives in near total isolation, confined to a small concrete cell for 23 hours a day. Even the 1 hour of recreation they receive happens in an enclosed yard, essentially a larger cell with a view of the sky through a metal grate. Each movement, from meals to showers to medical visits, requires the coordination of multiple officers. That means the facility depends on a large, highly trained staff. When there aren't enough people, critical operations slow down. Officers are reassigned to fill vacant posts, often outside their area of training. This process, known as augmentation, has become a common emergency measure throughout the Bureau of Prisons. But at ADX, where the slightest mistake could lead to violence or self-harm, it's a risky solution. Consider a medical emergency. Standard procedure at ADX requires at least 3 officers to enter an inmate's cell, 1 to secure the prisoner, 1 to provide support, and 1 to supervise. If the roster is short, those procedures take longer. Minutes of delay can mean the difference between life and death, especially in a facility where mental health issues and suicide risks are already alarmingly high. And the crisis doesn't just affect security. It ripples through every department. Medical staff, case managers, and psychologists are overworked, too. The lack of personnel means inmates often wait longer for evaluations or treatment. In a facility already notorious for its isolation, that delay can deepen mental illness and heighten desperation. Low morale, high turnover. Even for those who stay, morale is sinking fast. Union representatives from the American Federation of Government Employees, AFG, have warned that officers are running on fumes. Many describe working conditions as unsafe and unsustainable. Some have quit mid-career, while others suffer from depression, PTSD, or chronic exhaustion. The phrase, "the toughest prison in America," now applies just as much to the staff as it does to the inmates. The BOP has tried to respond with hiring bonuses, relocation incentives, and accelerated training programs. But these measures have done little to stop the bleeding. The agency continues to lose experienced staff faster than it can train new recruits. Those who do sign up often leave within the first year, citing impossible workloads and limited career growth. A systemic problem. This staffing crisis is not unique to ADX Florence. It's a national emergency. Across the Bureau of Prisons, thousands of positions remain unfilled. Facilities struggle to maintain order, suicides rise, and rehabilitation programs suffer. A 2024 Department of Justice audit found that nearly half of all inmate suicides occurred in single-cell confinement settings, conditions identical to ADX. The report linked these tragedies directly to staff shortages, policy violations, and operational failures caused by overwork. At ADX, where every inmate is confined alone, the implications are even more serious. Fewer staff mean fewer eyes on inmates who may be in crisis. Each time an officer is reassigned or a shift goes uncovered, the risk of unnoticed self-harm or suicide increases. The real cost of understaffing. For the Bureau of Prisons, the numbers tell a grim story. But for the people inside ADX, both guards and prisoners, the cost is far more personal. Officers describe collapsing from exhaustion or falling asleep at monitors. Inmates, meanwhile, report fewer check-ins, longer delays for basic requests, and a heightened sense of abandonment. In the end, the staffing crisis at ADX Florence proves that even the most fortified prison in America isn't immune to human failure. It shows that walls, cameras, and technology mean little without the people who operate them. As Representative Pedersen put it, we have to keep working to improve conditions and morale at the nation's only Supermax facility. Until that happens, ADX will remain a paradox, a fortress designed to contain chaos, now struggling against chaos of its own. Fact 10. Prison reform in 2024 brought ADX Florence back into the spotlight. When a nation begins questioning the kind of punishment it delivers, even its strongest walls start to tremble. That's what happened in 2024. America began to look inward, asking if the justice system it had built over centuries was still serving its people or slowly breaking them. And at the center of that storm was one of the most secretive and controversial prisons in the world, ADX Florence, the fortress known as the clean version of hell. This fact matters because ADX represents the outer limit of American justice, the place where control is absolute and mercy is optional. Every discussion about prison reform eventually circles back to this one facility, where human isolation is measured in years and silence is the only sound that never leaves. In the summer of 2024, the debate over prison reform took center stage in Washington. For once, lawmakers from both sides of the aisle found a shared cause, fixing a system that everyone agreed was broken. The result was the Federal Prison Oversight Act, a landmark piece of legislation that promised to bring accountability to the Bureau of Prisons and, perhaps indirectly, to places like ADX Florence. The new law didn't emerge in a vacuum. It followed years of reports exposing staff shortages, suicides, mental health neglect, and inhumane conditions across the federal prison network. The Bureau of Prisons had lost nearly 20% of its workforce in just 8 years, leaving guards overworked and institutions dangerously understaffed. Officers were burning out. Inmates were dying. America was paying attention. When the Oversight Act passed in July 2024, it sent a message. The era of secrecy in the federal prison system might finally be ending. The legislation required independent inspections of federal prisons, mandatory reporting of findings, and transparency in how institutions like ADX are managed. For the first time, the Bureau of Prisons would be forced to show the public what really happens behind those concrete walls. But as lawmakers celebrated progress, one truth lingered uncomfortably. ADX Florence doesn't quite fit into the reform narrative. It was never built to rehabilitate anyone. It was built to contain them. Since opening in 1994, the Supermax has housed some of the most dangerous individuals in American history: terrorists, cartel leaders, and violent extremists. Its cells are designed for total isolation. 7 by 12 feet of concrete, a narrow slit of a window, a bolted bed, and silence so deep that time itself feels slower. For some, ADX is where sentences end. For others, it's a test of endurance that few survive unchanged. Even as Congress debated prison reform, ADX Florence remained an anomaly, a place immune to mercy. While other federal facilities are being urged to expand mental health programs and reduce solitary confinement, ADX exists entirely because of those same methods. The inmates there are often under special administrative measures, SAMs, that restrict every form of communication, sometimes for decades. Still, not every inmate at ADX will die there. That's what most people don't realize. Many prisoners step down over time through carefully monitored programs that can eventually lead to transfers or release. These transitions raise haunting questions. What happens when a man who has spent years talking to no one is suddenly sent back into a world filled with noise, light, and people? Can someone truly rehabilitate after years of silence? Former wardens and psychologists have warned that prolonged isolation changes the human mind in irreversible ways. Depression, paranoia, hallucinations. These aren't side effects. They're survival mechanisms in a world without human contact. Inmates start talking to walls because walls are all they have left. As ADX marked its 30th anniversary, the comparison to its predecessors, USP Marion and Alcatraz, became impossible to ignore. Both of those ultimate prisons lasted roughly 3 decades before being repurposed or shut down. Yet, according to the Bureau of Prisons, there are no plans to close any facility at the Federal Correctional Complex Florence. For now, the Supermax remains the beating heart of American isolation. But cracks are showing. Under growing pressure, ADX has introduced limited mental health programming and step-down units for inmates deemed ready to rejoin general populations elsewhere. These changes may seem small, but they hint at a subtle shift in philosophy, from indefinite punishment toward limited reintegration. Still, for the hundreds of men confined within its walls, that shift is slow and uncertain. Why does this matter to the viewer watching right now? Because ADX Florence isn't just a prison. It's a reflection of what society believes about justice. If the purpose of punishment is to protect, ADX succeeds flawlessly. But if the purpose of prison is also to correct, to rehabilitate, then ADX stands as the ultimate contradiction. Every taxpayer in the United States, the United Kingdom, and Canada, nations that share deep historical ties over justice and human rights, should care about what happens inside those concrete walls. What's done in the name of safety affects how the world views democracy, compassion, and the rule of law. Supporters of ADX argue it's necessary, a place for those too violent to live anywhere else. Critics counter that no one, regardless of their crimes, deserves a life defined by silence and concrete. Somewhere in the middle lies the uncomfortable truth. The Supermax may protect society, but it also tests its conscience. As the reform movement pushes forward, the question grows louder. Can a system built on isolation evolve into one built on redemption? The Federal Prison Oversight Act was a step toward transparency, but transparency alone won't heal the damage already done. It will take more than oversight. It will take empathy, creativity, and courage to imagine something better. 30 years after it opened, ADX Florence still looms in the Colorado desert, its walls reflecting the light of the Rocky Mountains that its prisoners will never see again. It's a monument to control, but also a warning of what happens when control replaces compassion. Maybe, in another 30 years, people will look back and say that 2024 was the year America began to rethink its harshest prison, not as a failure, but as a mirror that finally made the nation see itself clearly.